My name is Lauren Zayu, and we're back for the second season of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered, the show about what you say and how you say it. We'll be chronicling the first 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration on everything from immigration to HBCUs. So join me for a crash course on this country's politics, current events, and how we move forward. Hello, my name is Lauren Zayu, and I want to welcome you to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. During the 2020 elections, we saw a high number of HBCU graduates running for office, organizing their communities, and impacting the election. Vice President Harris is a proud Howard alumna. Reverend Dr. Senator Raphael Warnock is an incoming senator from Georgia. Stacey Abrams is a Spelman woman who played an integral role in multiple states going blue for the election. The list goes on and on. Their success has brought out an important conversation on higher education in the United States, particularly in regards to HBCUs. Our guests today have attended and worked in higher education institutions and can give us good insight into this conversation. Jainaba Seckan is devoted to excellence in diversity, equity, and inclusion. A graduate of Spelman College, where she earned her BA in International Studies, she brings a global perspective to her work in creating inclusive spaces for people of all backgrounds. She is a certified unconscious bias trainer with a proven ability to develop and manage diversity initiatives and produce data-driven solutions. In Harvard University's Office for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, Jainaba plays a critical role in advancing a university-wide change initiative aimed towards inclusive excellence. Jainaba was featured in the OkayAfrica 100 Women 2019 list, honoring African women who are change agents and innovators in their industries. Minister Devin Jerome Crawford, originally from Birmingham, Alabama, is an alumnus of Morehouse College, where he received a bachelor's in philosophy, and University of Chicago, where he received a master's in divinity. Early in his career, Crawford served as a Humanity in Action Fellow for the NAACP, where he connected the polls to pop culture, leading a countrywide millennial voter campaign in partnership with Chance the Rapper's Magnificent Coloring World Tour. He was also named an Oprah Winfrey South Africa and Zimbabwe Leadership Fellow and a John Lewis Fellow. A scholar of African and African American religious ethics, historical theory, the intersection of faith and politics, and social movements in the US, Crawford's writing and activism have been featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Washington Post, CNN, the Chicago Tribune, and the Birmingham Times. I'm excited to welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered, Jainaba Seckan and Minister Devin Jerome Crawford. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you a great deal for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank y'all for being here. I'm excited to talk about the work that you do and the way that your HBCU experience has prepared you for that. And so we'll kick it off with Jainaba Seckan. What's going on?
Thank you. So my name is Jainaba Seckan. I take she, her. I am a diversity inclusion professional at Harvard University. I do diversity program management and university-wide change management initiatives. I've been there for about 4 years now. I joined from a management consulting firm where we supported VP level and above corporate executive women, providing unconscious bias training, executive coaching, board preparation, and the like. I am a proud graduate of Spelman College, where I met our lovely host many years ago. And originally from the Gambia, West Africa, grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, and now reside in the Boston area. Thank you.
Sounds great. Minister Crawford.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Devin Jerome Crawford. I currently serve as the staff director for the William Monroe Trotter Collaborative for Social Justice at the Harvard Kennedy School. I also serve as the Minister for Social Justice at the historic Myrtle Baptist Church in West Newton, Massachusetts. I'm grateful to join this podcast to talk about the work of the Trotter Collaborative, which is a fairly new initiative that really brings activists, academics together to think about interdisciplinary solutions to intersectional problems within the public square. So we look at the advocacy principles that have been practiced from movement organizers like William Monroe Trotter to Ida B. Wells Barnett to Rosa Louise Parks. And today we think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and think about how we can marshal their leadership and their scholarship to advance social justice in real time. So we offer classes, clinicals, and teach-ins toward this end. I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama. I wasn't born and raised in Cambridge. I'm a migrant to this part of the U.S., but born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. Went to college at Morehouse College, where I met Lauren many years ago as well, and went on to graduate school at the University of Chicago to pursue a Master of Divinity. So I see much of the work that I do now as an extension of ministry, knowing that this is not just academia for academic purposes, but it is impact-driven work driven by theological commitments and ethical commitments to build a beloved world community.
That is great, and I'm glad to have you both here to have this conversation. Now, all of us are HBCU graduates, and the two of you now work at Harvard University, which is viewed by many to be like the creme de la creme of higher education here in America. And so I'm wondering how you feel like your HBCU experience, particularly in the spaces that you're in, has prepared you for the work that you do now.
Sure.
Jay, we can start with you.
All right, great. So there are many ways that Spelman has prepared me for the work that I do now, but I think more than that, Spelman prepared me for life, and it prepared me for the quote unquote real world. And I think there's this unfortunate sentiment that most HBCU grads have heard at one time or another, that HBCUs don't prepare you for the real world. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth, right? And that entire sentiment is rooted, in framing the world through this lens of whiteness. I think Ibram Kendi put it really, eloquently in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's the last book I read, so it's really top of mind for me right now, and I might reference it a few times. But he speaks to this idea how, folks challenge Black spaces and deem them unrealistic. And really what we're doing there is, framing the world, framing America in this lens of whiteness. And that is not the truth. That is not how the real world operates. So I say all that to say HBCUs absolutely prepare you for the real world. I think two things that Spelman really did for me are, one, it's given me a deep and profound sense of what it means to belong. Being on this campus where I was constantly reaffirmed, nurtured, supported in every aspect of my identity allowed me to understand what that feeling of belonging looks like. And I am able to apply that to the work that I do. That is the experience that I am trying to create for others. And I know what it looks like, I know what it feels like, and I know what is required in order to create that experience for others. And then I think the second thing too is Spelman gave me a great deal of confidence and mental fortitude. And a lot of that came from being on this campus where we were afforded so much psychological safety, right? To make mistakes, to ask questions, to try new things, to explore different ideologies, different hairstyles, all sorts of things. Because, we enter these campuses as 18-year-old children, right? And to be able to go through all that questioning and defining and growth in this nurturing environment really gives you a strong foundation for the rest of your life. And I think John Wilson, who's my former boss and former president of Morehouse, put it best when he described his time at Morehouse as 4 of the most psychologically wholesome years of his life. I would absolutely say that Spelman was the same for me. And so I carry that confidence. I carry that all of that affirmation that Spelman gave me into the rooms that I now enter and occupy, right? Where I am often the only Black person or the only person of color or the youngest or the most junior person in the room. And I draw on everything that Spelman gave me to be able to bring my voice to the table with confidence, with authority, and with courage, really. And knowing that there are many sisters before me who have done this and that I have every right to be in these spaces and to say the things that I need to say. So I'm always so grateful for my experience from Spelman, and I lean on it constantly in the work that I do.
As you're speaking, I was just reminiscing on many of the formative and affirmative experiences that I had as a student at Morehouse College. I see those years at Morehouse in the Atlanta University Center as a time of becoming, a time of really exploring the nuances, the depths of what it means to be Black in America, from being in a student body of students that represented all corners of the world, from Bermuda to Barbados to South Africa to London. You have myself from Birmingham, Alabama, all coming together, not just for a college education, but really to pursue a calling. That Morehouse instills this sense of vocation that lets you know that your education is meant to help you do something greater in the world. That is not just for self-aggrandizement, but it really is to expand the franchise of democracy, to expand the freedoms that we have as citizens. A classmate of mine, Seamus Jones, who recently posted on Facebook this idea that HBCUs don't prepare you for the real world, they prepare you to change the world. Morehouse, and also I took several classes at Spelman College and Clark Atlanta University, had to diversify my education. But these institutions gave you a critical lens to think about white supremacy from the lens of Black liberation theology, from feminist theory with Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftall. These are professors, Dr. Ilya Davis, helped to wake me up from my dogmatic slumber, if you will, to really think about and critique the structures and systems that pillage Black bodies, that plunder us, and think about strategies for liberation, and prepare not just for a career, but really a life calling of expanding this work of freedom. So it was an affirming space, and it was a space that pushed me to be and become all of what my potential entails. Howard Thurman, I'll leave it at this, says that above the crowns of their heads, Morehouse places a crown above each student, that we're all encouraged to grow tall enough to wear. And so I take that as a lifelong call to continue to grow, to continue to learn, to continue to be critical and evolve as a human being.
Thank you both so much for capturing what those experiences are. And HBCUs are as important psychologically as they are academically, right? Like the richness that so much of what you learn in an HBCU, in addition to the confidence and what is it like the way that we move in the world, I think just allows you to put things in perspective and on equal playing field, right? And I mean, as a Spelman grad, when I went on to graduate school, there was this idea of for other people under the impression that like you wouldn't be prepared, you wouldn't be able to keep up with the academic rigor in the classroom. And so what happened was we would sit down in these spaces and like, yes, I had been forced in my political theory classes to read Kant and Hobbes and Locke, but I also had Toni Morrison and James Baldwin and Maya Angelou and these other scholars that no one referred to my white counterparts as being unprepared for not knowing the ones that I knew. And so it really allowed me to view holistically, like who's a scholar, who's allowed to be a scholar in this canon of knowledge that's supposed to come from is crouched in this whiteness and this westernness that I think for me, at least my HBCU experience completely undid. And I'm incredibly grateful for that because it made me a more well-rounded scholar and participant in various conversations. Devin, I thought you put it well with HBCUs equipping you to change the world. And I kind of want to talk about how that just played out in our most recent electoral processes from Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, Reverend Dr. Senator Raphael Warnock in Georgia, being elected along with, we know Leader Stacey Abrams did a great deal of organizing across the country in order for those things to happen. Vice President-elect Harris is a proud Howard alumna. And so we're looking at, and we're seeing it now, but like the highest halls where decisions are made, HBCU grads are there. We know that HBCU grads have served high up in the Obama administration. We know that other people in this administration coming in, I just remember the head of the EPA is also an A&T grad. And so it's also the first administration or first ticket that hasn't had an Ivy League graduate on it. And so what does it mean now as we have these conversations around what's a good school, what are the schools that are contributing to our world, and how that impacts something like rankings and prestige. And so I wouldn't have a conversation with y'all coming from a very prestigious place yourselves, how those decisions are made and what does it mean for HBCUs to be a part of that conversation. And Devin, we can start with you for this one.
Yeah, I think that, thank you for the question. I think that what we're witnessing now is really an extension of a long legacy of HBCUs organizing, teaching their students to organize, to build power, political power. We see this in Raphael Warnock's historic run along with the work of Leader Abrams and Latasha Brown, marshaling voters, registering hundreds of thousands of voters. This comes from this, what we're taught in HBCUs, not to just see things as they are and accept them, but to have the courage and the boldness to actually change an electorate, to challenge institutional leaders and incumbents. That audacity to engage in the process is something that has been passed along throughout HBCUs and their students throughout history. But I want to lift up particularly a value proposition that our HBCUs have to prepare us in this, and that's the value of the mentorship, the value of the networks of mutuality that we share, if you will. Because we can't look at the work of Reverend Senator Warnock without looking at his teachers like Reverend Dr. Calvin Otis Butts or Reverend John Porter in Birmingham, Alabama, pastors that helped him. We look at Spelman women who came before Stacey Abrams, like Marian Wright Edelman, who's also a Yale Law graduate, who's really led as far as policy and advocacy. That these mentorships and these alliances and networks that are built to help contextualize the education that we have at HBCUs is really critical. It helps us to really imagine how we can be these change agents, to like see folks who are in these positions who can help us to grow and mature and to essentially take the mantle when the time comes, when we prepare our entire lives for opportunities to lead. So I think that having the intergenerational transmission of knowledge, the networks, this idea that you're part of a long history and shared heritage is something that makes the HBCU experience special, that you are a part of this network, that you are a valuable component, and that we see you as a value piece in this larger struggle.
Absolutely. Devin, first, I just have to say I'm so jealous of your lighting because you were just glowing. And I'm really enjoying listening to you. But, in all seriousness, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head that this call to change, Spelman, we say it's a choice to change the world. And so when you step on that campus, that is what they were absolutely preparing you for. And we have seen Spelman women do this time and time again. And I think, we can go on and on about Leader Abrams and so many other Spelman women and Howard and FAMU and Clark, who are just really, changing the world of politics and really just any industry that they're in. But I think this, notion of what makes a good school, right? What schools just get to be elite. I think so much of that is rooted in, how selective these schools can be. And to a particular degree, sometimes it can feel a bit exclusionary. But again, I want to go back to something that Dr. Ibram Kendi said. And he said, what would the world look like if we valued intelligence based on not what people already knew, but their eagerness to learn? Their desire to know. And I think that is something that HBCUs excel at, because we meet students exactly where they are and we equip them with the tools, the knowledge, like you said, Devin, the mentorship, the guidance to be able to reach the greatest heights of their potential. And I think that is where we are elite. That is where HBCUs excel. That is what differentiates us from so many other institutions. And study after study has come out about the outcomes for HBCU students, right? How we have deeper and broader networks where we have greater job satisfaction, greater mental health and well-being, so many, factors when you're comparing the experiences and the outcomes for HBCU students. It's clear that something is being done right and is being done well. And I think something that I'd like to see is that all of the successes that HBCUs are, creating, especially in terms of upward mobility for first-generation students or low-income students, see that translated into our college rankings and into funding. Because I think right now, the way that college rankings are captured, the mechanisms and the metrics they're using, to determine these rankings favor PWIs in a way that they don't HBCUs. And there's a lot of really great research coming out that's showing that we have to reassess those rankings and the mechanisms they're using, because if you take out some of these factors, you'll see that HBCUs actually should be ranking much higher. And these rankings do matter because, for better or worse, they do inform the funding that some of these schools get. And so I'd like to see, all of this work, all of this, value that our schools have produced for the world, see that translated into being properly and appropriately resourced in the way that we deserve. But I think HBCUs are just a great example of Black ingenuity, of Black excellence, and how we maximize and the resources that we have available to us. And just looking at, our outsized impact. I mean, you will find HBCU grads across all industries at the greatest, levels of these industries. And when you look at the size of our schools, the population of our school, it almost doesn't add up. But that's how well we are doing at preparing our graduates. So I think, we are elite in our own regard.
I agree with you, Jana. But actually, as we transition into hold up there, that's something I was thinking about. As in when I first came to DC and I told people, that I attended an HBCU or even the number one HBCU, like there was kind of this like blank stare of whatever. And just as an almost like an experiment, I just started saying like, oh, I attended an all women's liberal arts college. And for so many, it was like, obviously, they're assuming it's Wellesley or Barnard or any of these other schools, where I'm like, no, it's Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. And it is an all women's liberal arts college. So my question is, why did that rank differently for you when you weren't aware we were a Black school, right? Mm-hmm. And so much of our conversation, because I also told my friends this could go to PWIs about, for lack of a better phrase, writing hard for your school, right? Like why I say Spelman so much, why I talk about my experience so much, and it's because it is undercut. Like when you come from University of Georgia, when you come from University of Texas or UVA, no one's going to pretend like that inherently makes you less qualified. But for some reason, my degrees, which have the exact same accolades as these other institutions, are viewed as inherently less than. And so we learn to put forward so much of why our schools are important because it is consistently being questioned. But keeping that in mind, Jay, we can start with you. Like, what is something that you would like to continue to be had in these conversations about what's a good school?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to my previous point, I think we really need to look at how we're measuring, these schools. What does success look like? Especially looking at HBCUs, how we are creating so much value. I think HBCUs are, graduating our students into at least the middle class income, right? We are, having so much success with supporting first generation and or low income students. That is an area where a lot of PWIs are struggling. And I think right now, the relationship between some PWIs and HBCUs is, looking at how we can recruit from these schools, maybe pursue a partnership, fellowship, a domestic exchange. But I think there is an opportunity for a knowledge transfer. I think PWIs need to look at HBCUs as peer institutions that you can absolutely learn from, where you can garner best practices, because we are excelling at this thing that you are, trying so hard to do, trying so hard to achieve. So, I think just kind of rethinking, the relationship that we have, how we're showing up in the higher education landscape and being viewed as, peers, where, this is a type of school where you can go to actually learn something from, not just this sort of transactional relationship where it's, okay, yes, we'll recruit and do programming and things of that nature. So I think there's so much opportunity to, kind of explore those relationships. But again, back to the rankings, back to that funding, we are creating value time and time again. It needs to, it needs to be rewarded. And it's been, exciting to see all of the philanthropy and donations and funding coming our way. And I hope that sustains over time, but we need to find, I think, more sustainable mechanisms too for appropriately funding HBCUs.
Yeah, thank you for that brilliant answer, Jainaba. When I think about the conversation around HBCUs, aware that we're in this moment of unprecedented citizen activism across the length and breadth of our country. People speaking out against police brutality, to inequities as it relates to the pandemic, who is given the vaccine, what type of contact tracing and supported isolation is given. HBCUs have a role in the space in these moments of social justice, fighting for social justice. I think about our institutions, Morehouse and Spelman, and also Clark Atlanta and Morris Brown, and the Atlanta student movement. That it was Rosalind Pope who drafted the Appeal for Human Rights, the SGA president at Spelman College, organizing with Dr. Otis Moss Jr. and Lonnie King. And these were students that compelled their college presidents to meet with the mayor of Atlanta, to meet with the governor of Georgia, to advance the agenda to end segregation. That HBCUs have been places where we marshal scholarship and leverage it to advance social justice, use scholarship as an organizing tool for social justice, where these are spaces that are hubs to really think about breaking white supremacy in this world, in this country. So as we are wrestling with these issues and this moment in this country, I would want us to really look at what we can learn from these institutions and the faculty and the alumni that come from this long tradition of resistance and of really making America be true to what it says on paper, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That there is an ethic, a moral ethic that exists at these institutions that help us to really expand what it means to be human and a citizen. So really not looking at HBCUs just as a place to prepare you for the corporate America or for the Ivy League graduate institutions, but actual moral spaces to help us think about the crisis in our country, how we might rethink these notions of equity and diversity, what it means to be human, what it means to pursue justice, what it means to be free, and really center these perspectives and the expertise of these folks that have a long history of fighting and dying to really make that, to struggle for that reality in this country that has not fully been realized. And so there's still work to be done. There's still a role for HBCUs in this current movement. And I'd hope that we, from the White House to Congress to local legislators, will really pool in the resources that these institutions, and not just the AEC schools, but thinking about Tougaloo College and how that was known as the cradle of the civil rights movement when freedom riders came from the North and went to Mississippi to train for the Mississippi freedom movement. So really tapping into that legacy and tradition that really is in our culture.
I completely agree. And I think that's actually a good place to kind of shift into I ain't sorry as far as like what I'm unapologetic about, which is acknowledging that our HBCUs are dynamic places where leadership is developed and so much richness happens. But we also have to remember to push our institutions too. And understanding that, like, I acknowledge for a lot of my queer Spelman sisters and siblings, right, it wasn't a place where they felt particularly affirmed. It wasn't a place where they felt the freedom that I often felt, and I don't want to cheapen that or pretend like that doesn't matter. That's a very real thing. And so even as we champion our schools, and as they like rightfully get so much of the praise they deserve, we as alumni in particular have to make it a point to continue to push, right? And I think that like a lot of institutions, there's a tension between like a very social justice driven student body and then an entity that's concerned with like branding and marketing and imaging. Like all of that can be true in one place. And so we have to come alongside so much of the student body in their push to be better. I'm thinking about, was it last year or 2 years ago, where the students at Howard took over the administration building in an effort to lobby for some complaints that they had and to advocate for themselves. And while the specifics of it are escaping me right now, that level of activism is prevalent across all our campuses and across all of our history, right? I'm sure we know the stories of Spelman and Morehouse students, you know, doing their best to make the Board of Trustees uncomfortable in order to achieve whatever political actions they were desiring of the time. And so I want to make sure that while I am unapologetic about my Spelman experience, of course, I do also encourage us to continue to push into that prophetic tradition that I do think we have, but have to continue to apply pressure about. And so kind of going back the other way, Devin, what's something you're unapologetic about?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, I'm a minister, and I came into really had a lot of formative experiences in Chicago as a student minister, not only as a student at the University of Chicago, but also a minister at Trinity United Church of Christ. And it was a Trinity where I really embraced this idea of being unapologetically Black, unashamedly Christian, or unashamedly a follower of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to lift up, particularly in this moment where we're witnessing white Christian nationalism that is sanctioning the insurrection of the United States Capitol. We witnessed white nationalists on the floor of the Senate invoking a prayer, thanking Jesus for sanctioning their conquest, for thanking them for allowing police officers to allow them into the building, and blessing the patriots, as they would call them, their insurrectionists, in their work. This is, to be sure, this is not the tradition of Rosa Louise Parks or Harriet Tubman or Martin Luther King Jr. But I'm very clear that I come from a tradition, as Howard Thurman would say, that by some amazing but vastly creative spiritual insight, the slave took a religion that was profaned by white Americans and made it something that was that fueled liberation and freedom movements. So I think it's important that we not separate the theological commitments that we have with our identity as people who are part of the oppressed, that are part of those who are on the margins, that we are inescapably in a network of mutuality, that I can't divorce myself from the lived experiences, the material conditions of Black people, and separate that from my theological commitments. And so I think that, it's important that we really identify whose Jesus or which Christianity we're talking about. And I know that you have various listeners of different faiths and traditions. And it really just gets down to, having a faith tradition that is rooted in liberation and not one that sanctions colonialism in apartheid, which is the religion of those who were in the Senate the other week on January 6th. So being unashamedly Black and unapologetically Christian is something that's pretty integral and something that I take with me in all the spaces that I'm in, whether it's at Harvard or at Myrtle Baptist Church or in the streets protesting with high schoolers and Black Lives Matter protests. It's something that I have to take with me to have integrity in the public square.
Jainaba?
Thank you. So I wanted to just comment on something that you said, Lauren. First, one of my favorite stories about Spelman is, when students locked up the board of trustees and demanded a Black woman president. And it's so shocking now to think about how long it took for us to be able to get there. But that is just such an incredible story and great example of that student activism on our campuses. And then again, Lauren, I think you're absolutely right that although our schools are incredible, there's absolutely room for improvement. No institution is perfect. No institution is without its flaws. And something I was encouraged and excited to see was, Spelman creating a policy to accept transgender students. And there's really great work being led by the Women's Center to educate, students, faculty, staff on making our campus far more welcoming for the LGBT community. So it's a great example of showing how we are capable of evolving with the times, right? Just like every other institution, we go through those growing pains, but we're doing it and we're making those strides. And then Devin, just very quickly, speaking to being unapologetically Black and Christian, as a Muslim on a campus, where our emblem says our whole school for Christ or something along those lines, I felt incredibly welcomed at Spelman as a Muslim. And I also did incredible learning about Black Christianity in particular, and the role of the church in the South and in these movements. And that is an education that I truly value till this day. So I think that is one area that we really excelled at in terms of, making sure folks of different faiths felt welcomed and valued, but also you had this firsthand education to experience, the Black church that led so many of these movements. So that's something I've always really valued. But for me, my I ain't sorry is something I'm really trying to be intentional about is creating boundaries as someone who does the work of diversity and inclusion. I think especially over the past year where there's this, renewed energy and interest in this work, I think it's important for those of us doing this work kind of protect our energy and create boundaries about when and with whom and how we engage on these topics, right? Because I think sometimes folks can maybe get a little too familiar and might want to accost you at a water fountain or in the restroom or in the kitchen and get a drive-by education on diversity, or, talk to me about, critical race theory. What did you think about this latest, atrocity? And the thing about doing this work as a person who is also marginalized, there is an emotional labor that comes along with that. And when I first started this work, because I love it so much and I was so eager and excited, I'm like, ooh, people want to talk to me about this. Let's do it. I overextended myself and made myself way too available to too many people all the time. So now I'm a lot more thoughtful about when, where, with whom, why, right? So it needs to be a training, a facilitation, a workshop, something along those lines. And I think even if you're not doing this work, but you just happen to be in the skin, folks will still seek you out. And that's unfair too, right? So I think, and especially as we are going through all of these challenges, right? Our communities are most impacted by COVID, right? We're having to live through these, atrocities of police brutality. And then, you have to go to work and have to deal with these issues as well. I think we just need to give ourselves permission to protect ourselves, protect our energy as much as possible.
I definitely see you on the protecting our energy and protecting our peace. And I think that's something that we're kind of coming into as a people, and I'm glad to see that. I also wanted to make one quick note, which was Spelman also just launched like the Queer Studies Chair, or the there's something for queer scholars that I think they're still doing the fundraising on, but it's still a really important part of making people feel seen and validated and affirmed on campus. And so I wanted to bring that up as well, or just to note that. But keeping that in mind as we transition into something that we are drunk in love with, or something we're exceptionally passionate about, I can go ahead and give it back to Jainaba, and then I'll end on this one. What has been your either something that you're drunk in love with, or just something that you wish you'd gotten a chance to say earlier? All of that is available. The floor is yours.
So I don't know that I have like 2 minutes worth of content here, but we are recording this on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I think in some ways this day has become a day where you watch white supremacists unironically quote King, and you see all these sort of distorted, and revisionist sort of reviews of his work, of his philosophy. And it's so frustrating. So first, he is our Morehouse brother. He is the alum of all alum. I will give Morehouse that. And it's, in one hand, I'm very happy to see his work uplifted, but I really do want us to explore that work authentically and through the lens that he intended it to be explored. And that is through the lens of justice, of economic justice in particular. And I was reading a really great article recently. It's called Shifting Philanthropy from Charity to Justice. And it speaks to, King's ideas around philanthropy and how, yes, philanthropy is great, charity is great, but what would do us a greater service is to interrogate the systems that necessitate philanthropy in the first place, right? So you donated to a food bank, but why is that necessary in the first place? Maybe we're donating books to an underfunded school. Why is that school underfunded in the first place? So I just envision this world where what would it look like if King Day was devoted, not even though, yes, a day of service, a day on, I feel it, yes, volunteering, charity is absolutely important, but let's go that step further. What would it look like if we spent this day really looking at these systems, really looking at these root causes, really looking at policies so that, year after year, we're not going to do the volunteer opportunity for the same thing. How do we eradicate the need for that, right? So that's just something that's been on my mind, and I've just kind of, keep ruminating on. And, I'm seeing all the posts go up and all the efforts going out, and I'm just like, let's, return to his message around justice, around economic justice, and something that the authors of this article shared that I really like and just captured exactly, his sentiment here was charity is commendable, but justice is transformational. Rant over.
Mic drop. Okay. How about you?
I absolutely love that. And I have to say that this morning, as part of the tradition, I have to read something of King in the morning that's in devotional. So I picked up and read Strength to Love, a Tough Mind and a Tender Heart. It's a personal favorite. But I definitely love this call to really engage King's work. I'm going to talk about someone different than Dr. King, although I fully endorse that rant. This past winter, I've really fallen in love with the works of August Wilson. August Wilson penned the Philadelphia Century Cycle, the Pittsburgh Century Cycle, which chronicles the journey of Black people, or the experiences of Black people in America over the course of the 20th century, based in the Hill District of Pittsburgh. And there's one play that's based in Chicago, a city I deeply love. But I just love the narratives. When I read August Wilson's work, I find myself in these people. I see members of my family in these people. The moral conundrums and just the ways that August brilliantly displays Black life in the plays, taking us from migrating from the South to the North, like thinking through how you build a family, build a community with the broken pieces of coming after the Nadir in this Reconstruction period. So it's a brilliant, beautiful series of plays, some of which that have become films, like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom on Netflix, and Fences, that was also produced by Denzel Washington. So I commend everybody to pick up August Wilson's Century Cycle, to learn about this brother, the people that he's written about, his wife, and the people that continue to bring these folks to the forefront. To help us become more human, to become more empathetic, and to really learn from the rich cultural heritage and history that we have as a people. So I fully, emphatically endorse August Wilson's work to everyone that's listening to this. And thank you so much for giving me this time to rant about it.
No, I appreciate you for taking it. And as far as mine, I wanted to touch on briefly some potentially inner community tension that I don't think should be there, primarily in that there is a lot of philanthropy going around to various HBCUs, and there's often the sentiment that certain schools don't need funding. They get all the money, they don't need X, Y, Z. And I want to take a moment to say that no HBCU was well off. None. Particularly with the comparison being predominantly white institutions, like nobody's doing exceptionally well. No one's endowment is in the billions. No one is anywhere near where we need to be. And I also want to make it a point to say, like, a win is a win for all of us. And so, like, people lose, or we start to lose once we start competing with each other or viewing particularly funding as a zero-sum game. Like, there's plenty of funding to be had and plenty of funding to be needed. And so I wanted to just take a moment to say that a win is a win for all of us. I think about Vice President-elect Harris, and that, like, HBCU, yeah, she's a Howard alum, but HBCU graduates across the country are ecstatic for the second in command of our country to be an HBCU graduate, right? Like, people applauded Gillum when he ran in 2018. People applauded Abrams when she was running in 18, and she continued to work in 20. And I think I don't want it to ever be a conversation as though our schools are ever feeling animosity towards one another. Like, it really is a family network. I get excited if I'm in a position and I come across a FAMU grad or an A&T grad or a Howard grad or a Miles College grad, a Bennett grad. Like, it's not going to ever be a situation where there's tension and frustration there. And so when our schools win, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that a win for one of us is a win for all of us. And so that will be my 2-minute rant as far as how that goes. But Jainaba and Devin, I'm so glad that y'all were able to come on today, particularly to have this conversation. I'm so grateful for the work that both of you do. And in the event that someone wants to reach out to probe you about your brilliance that you shared on today, Jainaba, what would be the best place to do that?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Seckan. I am also on LinkedIn, and yeah, feel free to be in touch.
And Minister Crawford, how about you?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Devin J. Crawford, on LinkedIn and Facebook as Devin Jerome Crawford. And I invite you all to look into the Trotter Collaborative and look into the work that we're doing by going to trotter.hks.harvard.edu.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm going to put y'all away really quick as I wrap this up. You just finished this episode of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. You can reach out to me on Twitter and Instagram at LawrenceAU, or if you're looking for the show, you can find us at Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered on Twitter and Instagram as well, and I hope to see you soon. You just finished this episode of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered with host Lawrence AU and music by Lighthouse Productions. If you want to learn more about the show, follow at Lawrence AU on Twitter and Instagram. You can also find more episodes on Facebook and Instagram at Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. Thanks for listening.